Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the next CABA webinar. For information purposes, I'm Anjanette. I'm a qualified nutritional therapist, and we're back with hopefully another interesting webinar. The one we've chosen for today is how to build healthy habits. So, quick bit of admin before we start. Please do ask us questions as we go through by typing them in. We have collated quite a few questions in advance, so we will address those at the end of the webinar. We're hoping for a run time of about 30 minutes with about 15 minutes Q&A. If you do have any extra questions, as I say, please do send them in. What we normally do is try and answer as many as possible during the 45 minutes in total, and then any excess questions, we'll answer them in the next couple of days, and these will be posted alongside this webinar, which is being recorded, so that you can dial back and listen at any other time. So please do feel free to sit back and relax and hopefully enjoy today's webinar. So looking at how to build healthy habits, the first slide we want to talk about is hopefully something that's achievable for lots of us. Imagine how you feel if you feel energized with an abundance of concentration, your mood is improved, and also a few pounds lighter. Is this possible? Well, I think most of us know that actually the answer is yes. So hopefully we're going to talk you through some ways that can make all of these possible. So today's agenda, first of all, we're going to do a very brief overview of what carbohydrates, proteins and fats are. We're going to look at the role of calories and alcohol, portion control. If you read in media in the last couple of weeks, there's a lot of focus towards calories and portion control. Are we actually eating too much? The government guidelines being 2,000 or 2,500 calories per day. Is that the right amount? Then we'll be looking at understanding food labels, perhaps a slightly boring or tedious subject, but hugely valuable to actually understand what you're eating. Then we'll look at 5 a day, helping you to eat at least 5 a day. Number 6, we're going to be looking at exercise, how we can help you quick and easily achieve some good exercise regimes that you can incorporate into your everyday lifestyle. And we're actually going to round it up with something called What's Keeping You Awake. We've got a couple of slides here on how nutrition can help if there's any nutrition related insomnia. So let's start with the first section then. So a brief overview about carbohydrates. So there are 3 what we call macro nutrition categories: carbohydrates, proteins and fats. The first one is carbohydrates, and they're categorized into simple and complex. Now, in terms of simple and complex, what's really the difference is that simple carbohydrates are the ones which provide you with a quick source of energy. So these are highly desirable if perhaps you are going to be doing some exercise or you've just exercised and you want a bit of an energy boost. Examples include things like bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, cakes, biscuits, and sweets. Of course, I'm not going to be advocating biscuits and sweets as a nutritionist, but that's just for completeness. The other category is complex carbohydrates. Now, these are the ones to perhaps focus on if you want improved energy, but more at a slower release of energy. So ideal if you're going to be sitting on your bottoms because you're based at a desk, for example. And some examples of complex carbohydrates are seeded or granary bread. So hopefully nobody is going to be eating white bread, or if they do, not very often. Oats, nuts, seeds, beans, peas and lentils. Now, carbohydrates are also in the media a lot at the moment because of the potential weight gain, I guess. A lot of people are saying. The crucial thing about it, though, from a nutrition point of view, is we will always advocate a balanced diet. So that does include carbohydrates, proteins and fats every day in your diet in some form. Carbohydrates is the main fuel for the brain, so it is quite important that it is included in your diet. I think the issue is actually in terms of quantity. So we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a few slides' time. But certainly including carbohydrates in your day, particularly perhaps in the morning for breakfast, would be a good idea to help feed your brain. And a lot of people have said that their mental clarity is a little bit clearer when they eat carbohydrates compared to days when they haven't. So the next slide here, I just wanted to delve a little bit deeper into carbohydrates. We talked briefly there about the difference between simple and complex carbohydrates. From a nutritionist point of view, we would never advocate any particular diet. For us, as I say, it's about having a balanced diet, including all 3 macronutrition factors. But one thing we do focus on a lot is something called the glycemic index or the glycemic load. You can Google this to find a bit more information than there is on this one slide. But basically, your glycemic index or the glycemic load is a ranking of how quickly a carbohydrate breaks down into sugar in the body, into glucose. So how do we use this information? What does it actually mean for us? What it means is that you can use food more efficiently at a better time for you. So as I touched on earlier on, if you're going to be exercising, then that's fine to eat the more simple carbohydrates. And in this category, these are the red font items to the right hand side of the table. These are the high glycemic index food and the foods which release their sugar content more quickly. So of course sugar is on there, but things like white and wholemeal bread is in there. Wholemeal bread actually has quite a lot of sugar in it. Brown rice and white rice are on there, corn flakes, mashed potato, and we'll have a look in a second because actually mashed potato is quite a high glycemic index food. And fruit without the skin on, most often your tropical fruits, things like bananas and mangoes and pineapple. The types of food or carbohydrates which are more neutral or medium glycemic index are things like honey, shredded wheat, Weetabix, new potatoes. So the reason that new potatoes are slightly better in terms of the release or slower release of sugar is because of this the skin on them. So fiber is better at slowing down sugar, but in this case here, new potatoes, if they're peeled and boiled, are still better than mashed because of their fiber content. They haven't been processed as much. You'll see that white basmati rice is also here. So basmati rice is better in terms of the speed of sugar release than white rice and brown rice. And we've also put pita bread, couscous and pasta. Now, the green font items are the low glycemic index foods. These are the foods which release their sugar more slowly, so more ideal if you're going to be sitting at your desk without exercising for a period of time. So fruit with skin on it, because remembering that the fiber is a good source of slowing down the speed of the sugar release. So things like apples, oranges, pears and peaches. Also on the list, beans and lentils, sweet potato. Although sweet potato obviously is called sweet, it tastes a bit sweeter than white potato, but it's actually better for you in terms of the speed of which the sugar is released. It's much slower than white potatoes, and sweet corn and porridge. Now, the list is endless. So if you want to Google it, as I say, and have a look for the type of foods that you normally eat in your diet and see where they are in that list, and see if you can perhaps switch them for a type of food which is a lower glycemic index to slow down the speed of which the sugar is released into your body. So the next category is protein. And protein, you'll hear a lot of nutritionists talking about protein. It's absolutely essential in our bodies for building muscle, for immunity, and most of us might actually be eating slightly too little. It's quite complex to eat enough also if you're vegetarian. So really, if you are vegetarian, focusing on the amount of protein is very important. So it should always be a key ingredient in every meal. Certainly from my point of view, even though I've been qualified as a nutritionist for over 12 years, I still now, every time I eat, whether it be a meal or a snack, I won't eat it unless there is a source of protein in there. Because if there's not, I know it's more than likely just going to be carbohydrates, and my body will respond to the increased sugar release in a way that I don't want it to. I want it to be a more stable sugar release. So including things like protein is really, really important. Protein fills you for longer and improves your energy, your concentration and your mood. It's made up protein of something called amino acids. Now there's 22, and of those 22, 9 of which are called essential, which means that the body cannot make 9 of them. So we need to get those 9 from the food that we eat. So which foods contain those 9? Certainly meat, fish, dairy, eggs. For vegetarians, soya, quinoa, or combining at least 2 of nuts, seeds, peas, beans, lentils, or grains. So combining at least 2 of those items in a meal will improve the protein content of your meal and help keep you fuller for longer. And then help improve if you're going to be exercising and trying to tone your muscles, it will help your exercise regime. So the third category is fats. quite a controversial one sometimes for people who are trying to lose weight. You know, we know that in terms that they are more perhaps calorific. Yes, that's true. But for a lot of us, diets are deficient in particularly the good fats. And we need fat in our diet. Our brain, our organs, every cell in our body has a fat layer for protection, but also really importantly for cell signaling. And to improve that and to keep our bodies functioning as well as possible, we do need to have some good fats in our diet. So good fats are things, as you can see in the picture here, things like oily fish, avocados, nuts and seeds, olive oil, those kind of things. Trying to limit the bad fats, so the fried foods, the processed foods, a lot of takeaways, for example, are cooked in fats that may not be as good. And I've put here as well about saturated fats, and in brackets I've put bad question mark, because I think historically they have had a lot of bad press. Saturated fats, the cause of high cholesterol and heart attacks and strokes. And yes, of course, there's a lot of science backing that information, but some clinical trials more recently are saying, actually, do you know what? There is more to it than that. Balance is perhaps the objective that we should be looking for, not a low saturated fat diet. So keeping a good balance with a lot of variety in your diet, and occasionally eating things like, for example, cheese. Now we know that cheese really does elevate your cholesterol, and it's high in saturated fats, for example, but it is also a fantastic source of nutrients in your diet. So the key thing is moderation. So yeah, bad fats, questionable. Some are maybe not so bad after all. And of course, the unsaturated fats are the good ones, as the picture identifies there. Now, the next slide I wanted to talk about are the foods which release sugar fast or more quickly. So these are the foods which you should maybe concentrate if you were wanting to exercise and wanted a quicker sugar release to provide you with more energy and more concentration. The classification there for simple carbohydrates, the examples are bread, pasta, rice, cakes and biscuits. And the question about fruit, are all fruit the same? Well, no, it appears not. And a key distinguishing factor is the amount of fibre that they contain. So if the fruit has skin on it that you consume, for example, an apple or a pear, that will be a better fruit to eat for a slower release of sugar. But if you're a big fan of bananas, and let's face it, us Brits, we do love a banana as a snack. Most of us take one to work with us. That's fine, okay? But think about perhaps when you might eat it. So perhaps the best time to consume your banana would not be mid-morning when you're craving sugar, etc. It would be perhaps half an hour or an hour before you go and do exercise to help fuel that exercise, rather than eating it at a time of the day when you're just going to be sitting on your bottom. So the other ones, which are the sweeter ones, as I mentioned previously, are the tropical ones, such as pineapple, a lot of the dried fruit, mango, and grapes are also in that category. I know grapes have skin on them, but they are still very sweet, so they are actually considered a higher glycemic index food. At the moment, because it's winter in the UK, apples and pears are brilliant. You can source them locally, so they should be a bit cheaper, they should be fresher, and a much better source of fruit to eat at the moment to help balance your sugar levels. So the second type of category are foods which release sugar more slowly. So these are the foods to concentrate on when you are not doing exercise in the short term. So, for example, the rest of that day or to the end of the day. So we've mentioned previously protein, those are the sources there. Fibre, I've mentioned that a lot about in terms of fruit, the importance of having fibre in your diet to slow down the speed of release of sugar from food. So that includes obviously vegetable as well. Oats, fantastic source of fibre, also really good for lowering your cholesterol. Also a very good source of glutamine. So for people, if they have any digestive issues, perhaps slightly inflamed digestive system, and they're not celiac, then oats would be a very good suggestion. Porridge in the morning, for example. But also high fibre foods such as peas, beans and lentils. So include those where you can in things like soups. In the wintertime, I think a lot of us are quite happy to have a hot lunch like a soup or something like that. don't choose a soup that has very little content. You'll be hungry in about half an hour. Instead, pick one that's got something like peas, beans, or lentils in it that will fill you for longer, but also provide you with a fantastic source of fibre and also protein. And the third category there is fats. And yeah, we're always going to promote fish, preferably the oily ones if you can. So the sardines, mackerels, kippers, those kind of things. Salmon's not too bad as well, got relatively good omega-3 content. Tuna, not really. I think we can do a bit better than that these days. I'm always trying on a mission to get people to switch from tuna to sardines. I know that may put a lot of you off, but actually I defy you to try it. If you actually get a tin of tuna for some well-known brand out there, a person's name and the opposite of East, you can basically just drain the tin of sardines, and they are already gutted. They've had their heads removed, so basically just mash them, and they look identical to mashed tuna, but they have sardines have a much higher omega-3 content. So I certainly use it in my family, and hopefully my husband's not listening to this because he doesn't know that we switched tuna for sardines a long time ago in our house, and the kids have no idea either. So it is a really, really, really good alternative to switch from tuna to sardines if you can. Nuts and seeds, obviously a fantastic afternoon snack. You could combine that with a source of fruit. You could be very clever and combine your nuts and seeds with a banana, for example. Although the banana is very sweet, by having nuts and seeds at the same time, you're slowing down the speed of the release of sugar. So you're making it a slightly more healthier snack in terms of sugar release into the body. And the humble avocado there. In terms of quantity, probably about half an avocado a day is an acceptable amount. Right, the calorific effect. I might not labour on this slide for too long. I think most of us know the answer to this. So on the right-hand side, I've just put a reminder there of the government guidelines for women. It's 2,000 calories, for men 2,500 calories per day. And how does that equate in terms of if we look at our favourite tipples? Cider is quite a big one, 233 calories in a pint of cider. I would probably say, you know, I'm not going to advocate drinking large amounts of alcohol. That would be very unwise. From a nutritionist point of view, probably the favoured alcoholic beverage would be red wine, a small glass of which could be considered medicinal because of the resveratrols providing the antioxidant effect. But anything greater than a small glass per day would be a disadvantage. So perhaps following a Mediterranean diet with a small glass would not be a bad thing. Now, we've got a couple of polls today, and this is the time for the first one. So the question is, hopefully you can see it anyway, but do you balance the food groups when preparing your meals? So we're going to, shortly you'll see in front of you where you can click on some categories there. So we'll give you a few minutes to cast your votes now. And after that, we'll have a look and we'll see what most of you have decided as to whether you do balance your food groups, and we can have maybe a little bit of a discussion as to whether we think this is important to balance your groups. A couple more seconds. Most of you have voted. Well done. We're about 80%. That means most of you are listening. We like it even more. Okay, shall we call time on that one? Yep. So 84% of you have voted, and let's have a look and see. Okay, so it's quite split. So 43% of you have said sometimes when I have time. Next is 29%. No, I never consider my food groups. Hopefully after the next couple of slides you might. And 28%, yes, I always include all food groups. So that's great. Probably not very surprising that, yeah, as a nutritionist, we would rather you did combine all your food groups. So in the next couple of slides, we'll talk about why we think as a nutritionist, from a nutritionist point of view, that that's important. Okay, so this first slide, we've got two slides that are a bit similar. This first one here is the nutritionist equivalent of the government EATWELL plate. You can, in your own time, have a look. There's quite a lot of text on there. But the bits I wanted to draw attention to is basically the graphic in the middle, which obviously is meant to represent your plate. And from a nutritionist point of view, you can see there that half of your plate should be a combination of leafy greens and salads and other veg. Now, why do we put that? Why do we say it's important to have such a high vegetable or salad component within your diet? Now, a lot of it is based on the 5 a day, but really, as you'll see here, eat a rainbow, 7 a day. So the 5 a day concept came from the World Health Organization, which basically said, looking at a lot of health conditions, people could avoid ill health by consuming at least 5 a day. So that's not for optimum health, that's just to avoid ill health. And in terms of quantity, well, what quantifies as 1 per day? In its most simplistic form, a clenched fist, so an apple, a banana, a pear, that kind of thing, is 1 a day. And so in the next couple of slides' time, we'll give you some examples of how you can achieve that 5 a day, but really having about half a plate a day of your fruit, vegetables, and salad there is advisable. We've also got here quite a large amount of protein. Now, from a nutritionist point of view, I've already said the main reasons in terms of feelings of fullness and satiety and toning of muscles and immunity, etc. Protein is very, very important. Now, we have also included carbohydrates, root vegetables, and whole grains. But as you'll see in the next slide, this one here, this is the government EATWELL plate. As a proportion, they carbohydrates is a lot more significant. It's, I guess, maybe a third, perhaps, of your daily consumption should be carbohydrates. From a nutritionist point of view, yes, as I say, we do like carbohydrates, but we would limit them a bit more because we know that at the end of the day, carbohydrates are just a source of sugar. And if we are not as active, as physically active as we should be, then of course the sugar will convert to fat, and we don't want to fuel the obesity problem that we currently have. So the government guidelines as well, perhaps a third there is also fruit and vegetables. From that point of view, of the suggested 5 a day, from a nutritionist point of view, it is trying to limit the fruit to no more than 2 per day. So more of the emphasis on vegetables than fruit, because although fruit is natural, it is still high in sugar. So trying to limit the fruit and eat more vegetables would be a preferred option. You've also got pulses and the pink section there is the protein section, and you've got dairy and alternatives in there as well. So they've also got a bit of a guidance on water, 6 to 8 a day. So perhaps at a later stage you can dwell on these slides for a little bit longer. Now, the next one is just an overview, because when we've done these seminars before, a lot of people do ask for what the actual guidelines are in terms of reference intake for in terms of the macronutrition. So we've just used here the reference intake as 2,000 calories a day. Obviously, this is an intake, a guided intake for women, and guys it's 2,500. But in terms of how much protein, the government suggests perhaps 50 grams, carbohydrates 260. And I've broken down here of which is sugars. So if you're looking at labels on packets and your concern is, am I eating too much sugars, or your issue is wanting to prevent diabetes, then looking at how much is sugars, you want the of which is sugars to be as little as a proportion of the carbohydrates as possible. Now, if foods, as you can see, the next column's high and low there, if foods are considered high sugar, this means they've got greater than 22.5 grams per 100 grams. And if they're considered low sugar, that means they've got less than 5 grams per 100 grams. So you can use that to when you're looking at labels to understand whether the food is the right food for you, or to help you choose between brands, perhaps. If your focus is on cholesterol, so you've got high cholesterol, then certainly looking at the fat content and focusing on the which is saturates, and be led there by the high and low amounts stated. Fiber, look or pay attention to that if you find that your bowel motions are very sluggish, and if you've got high blood pressure, then perhaps focus on the sodium or the equivalent of salt, because we know that salt is advised to be reduced if you've got high blood pressure, because it can increase to the amount of fluid in your body, increasing the volume of the blood as well. And the guidelines is no more than 6 grams a day. If you're a visual person, what does 6 grams look like? Well, it's a teaspoon. So no more than a teaspoonful a day. So actually not very much at all. Now we've got here an overview of what some of the traffic lights look like for various different brands as guidelines here. And I would probably say, like most things in life these days, we're going towards a more personalised approach. So look at traffic lights according to your health. So focus on, for example, sugar if you think you're diabetic or going that way and you want to prevent it. Saturated fat, look at that if you've got high cholesterol, and focus on the salt if you've got issues with high blood pressure. Now, a quick slide on how to help you understand how to read ingredients, because it can appear a little bit daunting, but actually it's not that tricky. You'll see on the picture on this slide that this is a good example of what all foods have, is basically a table on the back of them with all the nutrition information on there. So the column we really want to focus on is the per 100 grams. Ignore the per serving, because I wouldn't necessarily say that that is accurate. We know from events that we conduct that if you ask somebody to pour into a bowl how much breakfast they eat, it's pretty much always twice the amount of the recommended 30-gram serving. So in terms of figuring out how much of each item is in the food item you're about to buy, the per 100 gram allows you to compare apples and apples, as it were, allows you to compare between brands. So looking at that column, you then focus on, as I mentioned on the last slide, the bit that's relevant to you. Next to that, you will also see normally a label that says ingredients on it, and it is a list of items that are included in that food product. Now, those ingredients are listed in order of weight, so biggest item is first. So it would come as probably no surprise if you pick any well-known breakfast cereal and you'll find that the first item listed on there may well be oats or grains or something like that, and the second item would be sugar. Obviously, as nutritionists, we'd rather it wasn't that way. That basically means it's had quite a bit of sugar added into it. So the slightly more tricky thing is the items that are listed under ingredients are the items which have been added. Okay, because some things, like for example, if we're talking about sugar, some sugars are natural. So you may find two brands, let's take for example a cereal, and one cereal is actually healthier from a nutrition point of view, but if you just looked at the carbohydrates of which is sugar part, it looks just the same amount as the less healthier brand. So that's misleading. How can one healthier one have the same amount of sugar as a less healthier one? Well, the difference may be looking at the ingredients list. The healthier one may not have actually sugar added to it. It may instead have things like coconut or fruit in there rather than refined white sugar. So it is a little bit tricky in that respect to try and interpret how much sugar is added, because unfortunately government guidelines haven't stipulated that people have to add how much refined sugar is added as opposed to how much is refined and how much is natural. Of course, we'd much rather you went the natural rather than the refined. So hopefully I didn't go too fast through that. You can always listen again if I did. The next slide is helping you to your 5 a day. And I just wanted to just give you some examples here of how we can help you achieve your 5 a day. And remember that one of your 5 a day is the size of your fist. So adding fruit to breakfast, and that you could use, for example, in combination with the second bullet point, frozen. So actually now a lot of people say that the quality of frozen fruit and vegetables is just the same or perhaps even greater than fresh, because it's frozen at source. So a simple thing you could do would be to, instead of buying fresh berries as you enter the supermarket, the ones that are about £2 or £2.50 for a small punnet, go to the freezer section and you'll find you get double or triple the amount for the same price. Just pop them in your fridge overnight, they'll defrost, and you can add them to your breakfast cereal, a couple of spoonfuls every morning, and then you get your first tick of the day for one of your 5 a day. You can make a smoothie with any fruit which you think may be coming towards its end of its shelf life. Having one fruit snack per day, combining it with some nuts and seeds, really good synergistic tip there. What about some crudités, some raw carrots, celery, pepper with something like hummus in the afternoon or when you're making your dinner in the evening? A third to half of your plate being veg or salad. making soups with any leftovers. And, you know, if you've got kids, grow your own. You'll value your own vegetables more than you value anything you buy in a supermarket. And I bet you'll eat it rather than throw it away. Now, the other quick slide we wanted to do was just about urine. So in regards to, are you dehydrated? If we're looking at healthy habits to take forward with us, it's not just about what we eat, it's also what we drink. And are we drinking sufficient? If you were to Google how much should I drink per day, Google will probably tell you 1.5 to 2 litres a day. But how does Google know? We're all different. We're all different builds. Some of us exercise more than others. Some of us talk more than others. So your own personal guide is the colour of your urine. And ideally, when you're well hydrated, it should be a pale yellow colour, like champagne sort of colour. If it's darker than that, that generally would mean that you're perhaps a bit dehydrated. So on the way back to your desk, grab a glass of water. But ideally, we also don't want urine to be clear colour. If it's clear a lot of the time, you could actually be overworking your kidneys as well, because obviously your kidneys are having to filter everything that you're consuming. So go for the pale yellow would be optimal. And of course, no 2 days are going to be the same. Alcohol and caffeine dehydrate you, so keep this in mind. And also reminder about the fact that salt can make you drink more fluid, but also retain more fluid, and not ideal from a blood pressure point of view. This next slide I quite like because it's nice and visual, and it's got some really practical top tips in there. We've got, for example, switching tuna for sardines, switching a low-fat yogurt for a normal fat yogurt, because most of us know that low fat also equals high sugar. The exception being a lot of the Greek yogurt is low fat, but it doesn't have the added sugar in there. Switching fizzy drinks for sparkling water. Switching ice cream for frozen yogurt. I've done that in my house as well, and nobody noticed. Switching fresh fruit for frozen. Switching white bread for granary or seeded. Switching jam for nut butter on toast. Switching normal English breakfast tea for a rooibos or red bush tea, which is naturally caffeine free. Switching margarine for butter. And with regards to snacks, switching to more homemade smoothies, using up the vegetables and the fruit that you have. Now, the last bit in terms of healthy habits would be very, very important. It actually needs more than one slide on this, is exercise. Government guidelines are 30 minutes, 5 times a week. I'd love to say that's achievable, but honestly, if I look at myself, no, it's not. The important thing is obviously an awareness of the amount of exercise you're doing, and perhaps for some of us trying to do more. The key thing is the more muscle mass you have, the more calories you burn. And the third section here we've put is HIIT, or high intensity interval training, which is the new focus for exercise. A lot of people are speaking of the advantages of HIIT, which is basically exercising as much as you can for 1 minute, and then reducing or doing no exercise for 1 minute, and then repeating an exercise for 1 minute, and basically doing this perhaps 15 minutes in total. So actually you're only exercising for 7.5 minutes 3 times a week. There's a lot of clinical trials with HIIT that show it is very good for fat burning, and you don't need to spend an hour at the gym, and it's free if you do it at home. If you're at work, taking the stairs, even if you don't need to use facilities on another floor, and the old suggestions of parking far away from train stations, buses, entrance to the office, etc. Just being more aware of being more active where you can. So the second poll we've got towards the end here, not got much longer now, is how many hours sleep do you have? How many hours sleep do you have per night? I think sleep is going to be the next big thing. We've done a lot of mental health and mindfulness, and working in the health and wellbeing industry, you tend to see these trends as they come along before some other people do. And I think there's a lot of focus at the moment, or increasing focus, on sleep. Basically because we can't really do anything unless we've had a very good night's sleep. It affects so many parts of our life, it's actually very important. So let's see how many of you have cast. 81, good. 81% of you are still listening. Fantastic. We're still engaging with you. Good. Okay, we'll close the poll now. So actually, it's a lot better than I thought it would be. 63% of you get between 7 and 9 hours a night. Brilliant. Okay. 37% get less than 6 hours, and 1% get over 9 hours. That's lovely. If you've got small kids, yep, that's where I want to be. Right, so moving on to the next couple of slides, we're going to be talking about sleep. And government guidelines, well, what do people suggest? The average adult sleeps less than 7 hours per night. And as you can see, if you're an adult, so over 18 years old, it's the average person suggested to need 7.5 to 9 hours a night. So for most of us on this poll, on this webinar, we're getting it. Question is quality though. So what's keeping you awake? When we do this seminar, these are the common things that people say to us when we take a poll. Stress and anxiety, number one, every time. You might go to sleep all right, but you wake through the night and then you can't get back to sleep again because your mind is in overdrive. For some people, it might be something called obstructive sleep apnea, and that's where they go to sleep and they struggle to breathe, and they might wake choking. For a lot of people, this can be due to excess weight, excess pressure on the ribs, and the lungs are struggling to breathe. But it could also be a slight jaw malalignment, which is disrupting the quality of their sleep. You may find restless leg syndrome. Some people say they get that a lot as a side effect of medication. Depression, of course, absolutely. A lot of people with depression say it does affect the quality of their sleep. Alcohol, most of us will know that after a few drinks, you might get the desired number of hours, but the quality is certainly not what it should be. And the last point there, hormones. A lot of menopausal women particularly really struggle with their sleep, and good old hormones is the reason for that, which is, I think, 52% of the British population is female. So that's a fairly large contributing factor, considering every single woman is going to go through that at one stage or another, hence why I think sleep is going to be the next big thing. So I wanted now to talk about what a sleep-friendly chemistry and make this as easygoing and understandable as possible. Now, what we've got here, just let me see if this works. Yep, it does. Brilliant. Is why are we talking about nutrition in regards to sleep? How can it help? Well, if we actually start with the very right-hand side, we've got something here called melatonin, which is something that our brain naturally releases upon darkness, and it helps us to go to sleep. Okay, so it's very, very important. If you struggle going to sleep, it's very important that you put your smartphones, your devices, anything with the blue light away at least half an hour before bed, because we know that these devices prevent the release of melatonin. Okay, so that's the first really simple thing you can do. But natural sources of melatonin you can include in your diet, we've listed there. Now, for some people though, they don't have the smart devices in front of them, they've ticked that box, they're still having trouble. So this may be because they don't have enough serotonin, because you need quite a bit of serotonin to make melatonin. And these particularly might be to people who are actually prone to mild or moderate depression, because we know that people who are depressed, if they go to see their GP, the GP will prescribe a classification of drugs called SSRIs, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and they basically just increase the amount of serotonin in your brain. So if that's you, then yeah, you may well find that a lot of depressed people find it's more difficult to get to sleep because perhaps there isn't enough serotonin to make the melatonin. How can you achieve this from a nutrition point of view is eating foods which have a higher tryptophan content, because we need tryptophan to make serotonin. And you'll see here 5-HTP is actually a supplement that you can buy from a health food store, which can also help boost serotonin levels. However, there is one very large caution with this, that you should never take 5-HTP at the same time if you're on antidepressant medication, because they have a similar action. So if you are on antidepressant medication and you'd like to try 5-HTP, you do need to do it following conversation with your GP. Okay. So now I wanted to round up, I think, just let me check if this is the last slide. It is the last slide. So in terms of CABA, how can we help? Hopefully most of you know about the Wellbeing Zone and what's there and what's available to you free of charge. A fantastic source, not just you, for your family, etc., to access. And on this next slide as well, when we talk about asking you just to make sure you've asked any questions, I also wanted to bring your attention, if you don't already know, about GDPR. So as of the 25th of May, not actually that far away, CABA won't be able to send you any information about any of the wonderful things that are available to you unless you opt in for CABA to send you this information. Okay, so if you have already opted in, that's fantastic. You do not need to do anything else. If you haven't already ticked that box to say that you are happy to receive CABA information, then please do it. Okay, you can do it through various different ways. You've got the link there on the CABA website, or you can phone up and opt in. Basically, it means if you don't do that before the 25th of May, you won't know about any of these wonderful webinars that we'll be bringing you, all these courses, everything that's available to you. So we do try and urge you, please, as soon as you can, do register your interest before the GDPR deadline. So on that note, we hope you've enjoyed today's webinar. We will go through some questions now that were emailed to us in advance. We have got quite a few, and when we've done those, we do also have hopefully the questions that you've typed in as we've gone along today. And just as a reminder, we'll answer as many as we can in the allocated time. The ones that we don't answer, we'll certainly respond in writing format, and these will be made available alongside this webinar today. So looking at the questions, there are some good ones here. Many people my age, include me, drink too much. I have no interest in having a drink, either morning, lunchtime or afternoon, but when the evening comes, I suddenly get the urge to have quite a few beers. They say one drink is too much, but two is not enough. What advice can you give? I'd say that, yeah, from a nutrition point of view, we're not going to advocate too much alcohol. Small glass of red wine. If you're the person who wrote this question, perhaps of an evening, a small glass of red wine may be your answer, but limit it to a small glass. If one is not enough, is that because you want more than one because for example, the relaxation effect is not the same as it used to be, therefore your alcohol tolerance has gone up? If that is the case, then perhaps do cold turkey for a period of time, reduce it until your tolerance is a bit lower. But yeah, we're not going to advocate really that much alcohol. So I'd probably say also think about the situation of an evening. Are you perhaps, is it boredom? Is it habit? Perhaps address those issues as well. Second question, any tips on how I can reduce blood pressure? Mine is currently around 160/85. I hardly drink, in case that's a standard response. No, sorry, it's not a standard response. Excuse me. So 160/85, just so people know, it is slightly on the high side. It should really be less than 140/90. So it's slightly high. Key things to remember with blood pressure, it's not really necessarily just about alcohol. You should look at things like cholesterol, so have your cholesterol tested. If your cholesterol is high, the space for the blood to flow through the artery is reduced, so therefore the pressure goes up. So check your cholesterol levels. Also look at your salt intake. Ideally, you shouldn't be adding salt at all, either to when you cook or when you eat. And also look at things like your stress level. We know certainly stress has a massive impact on our blood pressure. So look at improving your resilience, and certainly CABA has some fantastic resources online there to help you improve your resilience. And for each of us, it is a unique response. But try each of those things. Those are generally the main things that actually contribute towards high blood pressure. Third question. With the recent articles of processed foods, for example, mass-produced bread, chicken nuggets being linked to cancers, is this the same for corn products? For example, they're nuggets which contain processed corn and breadcrumbs. Being a massive corn eater, I'd be very interested to know. Do you know what? I'd be really interested to know as well, because I actually wrote to Corn because I had this question a few days in advance. They said they'd get back to me before 12 o'clock today, and they haven't. So unfortunately, I don't have the official Corn answer. But what I would say is that the concern that's been written about in the media recently is with regards to particularly processed foods that have been salt added to them. They've been smoked, for example. And those are the things that are perhaps, well, particularly the smoked, is perhaps linked to increased risk of cancer. I think it was the World Health Organization had stated that. So they would rather that people ate more natural foods rather than processing foods. So I can't give you the official answer, as I say, because Quorn haven't replied, but I would suggest that perhaps Quorn might not be as bad as certainly some of the processed meats. Question number 4. What advice would you give a woman in her 70s who has no thyroid due to Hashimoto's disease and is putting on weight? This is increasingly common. We see a lot of people with thyroid issues. So hopefully, if you have no thyroid, hopefully you're probably on thyroxine, which is prescribed by your GP. I would check that your thyroxine levels are adequate. For most people, the checkups actually are just once a year, and it may not be quite the adequate level for you. Certainly, thyroid governs your metabolism. So if your metabolism is slightly sluggish and you're gaining weight for no explained other reason, then I would look at your thyroid medication. Number 5, I know it's possible to reverse pre-diabetes through diet, but despite being at the correct weight, exercising and reducing sugars, this has not been too successful so far. The GP is now recommending metformin. Help! A proper nutrition strategy is needed. Okay, so someone who's pre-diabetes, so they're not quite there yet, but they're on that slippery slope. And metformin is the standard prescribed medication by GPs to improve someone's response to sugar. I would say, as a general guideline, Google the glycemic index, glycemic load. That's a good way of eating in response to how your body processes those sugars. As we talked about in today's webinar, trying to encourage you to have more low glycemic index foods would certainly be great. Exercise is, of course, important, to keep that in mind too. But there are some good glycemic index cookbooks out there as well. I think Patrick Holford has got quite a good one for some suggestions. But I know a lot of people who have done a lot with their diabetes in terms of reversing it just by looking at glycemic index. Number 6, I've got such a sweet tooth. How do I cut down on sugar? Okay, couple of things. You could, it depends on the person as to whether you're an all or nothing person. In terms of nutrition, certain things that can help would be including cinnamon. Cinnamon is a natural thing which can help balance your blood sugar level. So adding that to something sweet like crumbles or something like that, or porridge, or if you put sweet things in your porridge, that can help. As a mineral, chromium is very good. Chromium can help balance your blood sugar level, and it's something you can buy from health food stores. It's a bit like metformin, I guess. Good old cold turkey works for me. Doesn't work for everybody, but abstaining from sugar for perhaps 30 days, and then basically, the cravings disappear until Easter or Christmas, and then you start all over again. Number, let me see what number next. Where am I? There's quite a few sugar questions. They all look the same. What's your number one most nutritious 30-minute dish after coming home late after a long day? Yeah, this is a good one, okay? Because there's lots of people out there who work late or have kids or whatever activities in gym in the evening. Do you eat? Don't you eat? Yes, you always eat. But if you're going to eat late, eat something light, like eggs. So like an omelette, really good idea. 2 eggs, a load of frozen veg, like stir fry in there. Takes 5-10 minutes. One of my favorites is like salmon fillet. And you don't even need to do anything amazing with it. I will basically just put a salmon fillet in the oven and just 5-10 minutes and it's done. It's really quick. You could put some spinach or do some stir fry veg alongside it. But those are certainly 2 of my favorites from a nutrition point of view that I think are well balanced and not high in fat and are a good source of protein. Number 8, which are the best probiotics to take? I'd probably say the best ones, there are some really good brands out there that you can either buy from an independent health food store or online. Some good brands are Solgar, BioCult, BioCare, is another good one, and they do some really good ones for kids as well. The general advice on probiotics is once you open them, keep them in the fridge. It preserves their life for a bit longer. And I think a lot of the guidelines say take them with food. I actually tend to find that they work a bit better taking them away from food. So perhaps the last thing at night before bed would be a good idea. Number 9, I'm a pre-diabetic. I have to cut my sugar intake. However, I've been suffering from depression at the same time, and I just cannot stop comfort eating sweets and junk food. What should I munch on when I desire something to eat? If it's well, it's a really, really tricky one because it's actually more psychological than nutrition related. Because I totally get that some people just need to eat out of boredom, out of stress, and they're not actually even hungry. So if that's the case, nutrition is not the answer. It's a case of looking at how to change the mental processing or thought towards food. Certainly, I know through CABA, a lot of the people that you'll speak to if you phone up are CBT trained, cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's a therapy which is gaining a lot of credibility and also available on the NHS now. And it's all about reframing how you think about things. So that could certainly help in terms of psychologically to help how you think about foods if it's that. But I do know some slightly unusual things that people have told me they really like. Frozen grapes. Some people put grapes in the freezer and swear by eating frozen grapes of an evening to quell their sugar desire. Why not? Don't stop there. Chop up a banana and put frozen banana in there as well, or perhaps popcorn, as long as it's not a salted or a toffee one or something like that. I've been trying to have nuts and fruits, but I need more variety. Yeah, I understand that. I've also been told I should cut down on carbs as much as possible to closer to zero. Is this a good advice? I wouldn't say close to zero, no. Cut down, perhaps yes. It's hard to know without knowing how much you currently eat. But if you look at the earlier slides in the webinar, that should certainly give you a bit of guidance in terms of how much you should be eating. And I'd probably go with the nutritionist EATWELL plate rather than the government one. Number 10, I believe I have a healthy, balanced diet. However, I've been advised today that my cholesterol levels have been gradually rising over the last 10 to 15 years. What suggestions do you have to reduce these levels without taking medication? Yeah, it's well done, first of all, for getting it tested, because a lot of us don't know what our cholesterol level is. And the scary thing is, there are no signs and symptoms of high cholesterol. So don't assume that if you're slim, that you don't have high cholesterol. It is not related to your body shape at all. So the key things to remember are to reduce the bad cholesterol is things like not smoking, watching your alcohol consumption, not eating too many of the bad fats, and also doing things like eating more oats in your diet, more higher fiber diet, but also consuming more oily fish or taking a fish oil capsule. That will improve your good cholesterol. Number 11, I'm training for the London Half Marathon in April. I'm now at the stage of running a half marathon each weekend, and it's really sapping my energy. What's the best thing for me to eat straight after a run? Or is there anything I should be avoiding? Okay, really good question for this time of year. There's an awful lot of people out there who are also training for marathons and half marathons. I'd probably say that it's really, really easy to overeat because you feel really virtuous. You've just done this brilliant run. You've hopefully, burnt loads of calories. But unfortunately, there are also a lot of overweight runners out there. And although you may be cardiovascular fit and able to do a half marathon, carrying the excess weight is not good on the joints either. So a good thing would be to just still keep in mind the quantity that you are eating, but eating a balance as well. So making sure that, as well, guidelines are within half an hour of finishing exercise, you should consume protein. So make that a leanish source, an easy digestible source of protein. I'd probably say something like fish or eggs would be fantastic. Not the fillet steak. That's a bit harder to digest. So eat something a bit simpler in terms of protein, but of course including some carbohydrates in there as well. and most importantly, keep a check on your hydration levels. But yeah, a balanced diet within a balanced meal within half an hour of exercise, if you can stomach it, would be good. If you actually, a lot of people say they don't feel hungry immediately after they run. If that's you and you still don't feel hungry after half an hour, then maybe something like a small, I don't know, a yogurt or something like that, a good source of protein. But if even that you don't fancy something like that, then maybe a protein shake. But really, a protein shake is no substitute for food. Number 12, I never feel hungry until 11 o'clock in the morning, but then I often get hungry between 9 and 11 o'clock at night. I hear it's not good to eat late, so how can I prevent the hunger pangs and eating so late? I'd say probably one of the first things you could do is I understand a lot of people don't get hungry first thing in the morning, so I'd set yourself a challenge, and I'd say maybe eat an apple every morning at some point before 11 o'clock. You may not enjoy it at first, but after a couple of weeks, if you then took the apple away, I bet you'd miss it. So try consuming something small in the morning would be good, just to get your metabolism going. And then hopefully by readdressing the balance of the timings of your food, you might not crave so much so late on in the evening. Is this just my body demanding food as I don't eat enough in the morning? Perhaps it could be that. If I consciously try to force myself to eat more in the morning, what would reduce my hunger pangs? Yeah, so try the piece of fruit like an apple. Maybe even a yogurt would be a good idea. Cravings for sugar, carbs, etc. I sometimes get late in the day. Yeah, and I think that's because your body's telling you it's crashed because it needs more fuel in the morning. Could be argued are mechanisms to get the nutritions we lack. So should we even fight them? No, I wouldn't fight them. I wouldn't fight your body. It's telling you something. It's telling you to look at the frequency and when you're eating in regards to when you're exercising as well. So take into account commuting and things like that. I'd say, yeah, certainly start to eat something in the morning. High protein, low carb consumption, along with cardio and resistant workouts, is proven to lead to weight loss and muscle gain. Yep, that's true. So I would focus on the protein. Remember, the protein fills you for longer. So that would be a good thing. Right, in terms of time, I think we've done an hour, which is slightly longer than we actually intended to do. I think we were hoping for 45 minutes, so apologies for that. We haven't got round to answering any of the good questions that you've typed in today, but we will get to answer them in the next couple of days. So if you have typed in a question, please do look out for that. And yeah, quick reminder about the GDPR. Don't forget to fill that in. And thank you for joining us.